How are you all doing? It's Miss Chanel, Coach Chanel, Language Success Coach, here to give you the secrets for CSEC exam. And today's secret is actually going to all be about CSEC English A and short story writing for CSEC English A. So, guys, I am definitely taking just a few moments to set up a few things, and then we're definitely going to start. But I'm very excited to be starting our very first episode of our Monday Night Lives and to be able to focus on English A. English A, as I was explaining to a student just yesterday, is a very practical subject. Unfortunately, a lot of that practical element does not happen. I tend to get many learners who are surprised that they should be writing every week because honestly, writing is a skill, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it. Now, what's a bit challenging for English is that you have different, not just approaches or perspective, but different types of writing. So it can be a bit frustrating. So today we're going to take a look at some of the basics for the short story. Now, for short story, that's our most creative element. Actually, personally, I wish it were not part of the exam. All right. And I have spoken about that already. Um, I really do wish it was not part of the exam because being creative on a with a time limit is very challenging. And that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about what you can do for short story. Because again, you do have to be creative and you do have to be creative within a very specific time limit. All right. So just letting you know, gonna start. Of course, if you have any questions, please do put your questions here in the chat. I will get to your questions. I may not be able to answer your questions immediately while I'm speaking or giving the information, but I'll definitely take a look at the chat, see what those questions are, and I will reply to you. All right. So when it comes to short story, you definitely want to ensure that you have a story idea, and that's often the very first step. A lot of students don't understand or they underestimate the importance of the planning process. And I think it's the planning process that confuses many people. Many of my students think that when I ask them to plan a story, that I'm asking for blueprints. So if you know what blueprints are, they're essentially the plan for a building, right? An architectural plan, right? And it's often extremely detailed, extremely detailed. There is no need to be that detailed in your plan, all right? The purpose of a plan for your story, for exam purposes, and this is based on my advice, is for you to have an idea of where you're going to go with the story. So it's basically you developing your story idea and being able to have the general actions down so that while you're writing your story, you don't have to wonder, so when he crosses the bridge, is he going to live or not? You should already know, for exam purposes, what's going to happen at the end of your story. All right. So essentially, our very first most important step is to ensure that you're planning your story. And if I have to really explain what planning is at its very basic, is that you have a story idea, right? Now, a story idea is going to be essentially having a character encountering a conflict within a particular setting. That's how I explain story idea. Once you can identify those three elements, you've got a story idea and you should definitely be able to work ahead with your story. Another really important basic that you need to understand for the story writing are what are your elements. Now, this may seem like too much information, but you also need to understand that you're covering the elements so that you can get your marks for the exam, right? For the exam, for CXE, you do need to have a character. I don't know how anyone is writing a story without a character, but you do need a character. You must see that character face a problem. So there must be a problem, all right? You cannot write your story without a problem. All stories must have a problem. Why must there be a problem? Because you're going to have some sort of, let's use the word resolution, right? Resolution doesn't always mean a happily ever after. It essentially means that we know what happened at the end of the story. All right, that's what a resolution is. All right. Another key element that you do need to know, and I already kind of touched on it by mentioning resolution, would be your plot structure. I'm going to say plot structure. All right. So many of you might have in school, maybe, done the plot diagram where you've got your exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, as well as resolution. That's really what plot structure is. I'm going to give you an even easier way to think of it. And this is what I normally guide my students to do, especially if thinking of it in terms of exposition and climax is too challenging. You need a beginning, middle, and an end. Your first paragraph is your beginning. Your second, third, and probably fourth paragraph, that's your middle. Your final paragraph is your end, right? Because ideally for exam, you're probably going to write about 5 to 6 paragraphs. Six, yeah, we'll see. But about 5 paragraphs. 3 paragraphs, no. Highly unlikely, highly unlikely, highly unlikely. But definitely 5 paragraphs is a really nice sweet spot for the exam. All right, it's a really good sweet spot for the exam. So just going back to what I said before in terms of that character experiencing a conflict, as I said, that's definitely part of a story. You could think of any story. It can be any format. It can be a movie. It can be um, uh, an anime. It can be video game storyline. Any storyline is going to have a problem. But what you have to do for this exam is write about one problem. Focus on one problem. I've had learners in the past who are really invested in some really popular TV shows that are series that go on and on and on and on. For example, like Grey's Anatomy, right? I don't even know how many series that is, how many seasons, sorry, that is by now. It's a lot of seasons. So they get invested in those shows, but those shows require multiple problems happening. And then some of the problems are ongoing. They may not be resolved in the first season. They're there to add to the dynamics of the story. And it's possible to add to the dynamics of the story because why? It's going on for seasons upon seasons. In the exam, you have 45 minutes recommended time to complete 400 to 450 words with a beginning, middle, and end, with a character that's identifiable. And you've got to have that character face a conflict and resolve it, right? So you actually don't have room in your story for more than one problem. I've actually had students try to do more than one conflict. It doesn't work. I myself have written, I think at least 25 stories based on the CSEC structure. Once you try to add another conflict, it just goes over the word limit. If it goes over the word limit, it can't be properly assessed. And when I say it can't be properly assessed, you're not going to look at any words over the word limit. So, to give you an idea of why that's a bad thing, let's say you decide to write 600 words. And when, as the examiner, as the person marking your work, when I get to the 450 mark, you're still deep in your rising action. You're deep in the middle of the story. Ooh. Then you don't have an ending. I don't know your character development because I'm not reading the rest of it, right? I'm not reading the rest of it. Thus, it's going to be a lot harder to mark you because I just don't have it. It's going to be as if you've not completed your work. So you really want to start practicing writing stories and ensuring that you're completing your work. All right. I really do beg of you. And one of the things I would say, and although I did say at the beginning that I would take this question out of the exam because it's so creative. Like I would put this in an SBA instead, honestly. However, it's probably one of the easiest components to practice for the exam. You can take any sort of inspiration around you and write a story. You could write a story based off this necklace, all right, as practice, right? You could write a story based off this necklace. You could write a story about what's the word on this? Choose happy, My little clip says choose happy. So you can write a story about a person who believes in the mantra of choose happy. Or you can write a story about a character who has a treasured magnetic clip like this, and maybe it came from their mom, right? And their mom's passed on, right? And maybe they've lost it, right? So you can take any sort of inspiration around you and write a short story. All right. But you do have to nail that 400 to 450 words. And I would tell you that does take practice, that does take time, and it does take skill because writing stories at that, to be honest, CXE is very misleading in some of its terms, right? So what you're writing is actually not considered a short story. If we look at it international terms, it's called flash fiction. Flash fiction is where that would be categorized. And a short story is actually 3,000 words. Yeah, guys, 3,000 words. You're not even writing a short story. You guys are writing flash fiction. And I would say to a certain degree it's a bit more challenging and it does require a bit more work, a bit more effort, and a bit more practice. Now, I could say that about any subject. I could say that about any other question in paper two for English A. However, I'll definitely say it about short stories in particular because a lot of business thinks that, oh, that's the easiest question to complete because it's just going to come from my own imagination. I will tell you, however, as much as it comes from your imagination, I have assessed stories and I have told learners, hey, this is where your story is going based on what you wrote. And that's at secondary and primary level because it's more or less the same process. Because story writing is more or less the same process. The difference is going to be your maturity of thought, is going to be in what you're going to include in your story. All right, wonderful. So these are some basic guidelines that I would recommend. And if I have to sum it up, is one, think about your story idea. All right, definitely think about your story idea. Two, do not write outside of the word limit. CXC really, however they do it, comes up with very specific word limits. Please do stay within the word limit. Um, Three, practice writing stories. Okay. For the exam, if you haven't seen the exam papers yet, you either get a written prompt or you get a picture prompt. I'm not a fan of the picture prompts for CXE. They don't seem to be living in the same century that we're living in. So I'm really not a fan of some of their picture qualities. And honestly, I'm not a fan of the picture choices. However, you can use anything, any inspiration to practice with and come up with really good stories. And your stories don't have to be um, best-selling work. All right. I'm not saying write bad stories. I'm saying you don't have to feel like, oh, I don't write stories. I don't like story writing. I'm not a story writer. Therefore, I can't write the stories. No, 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 no. Just practice coming up with a story idea, developing a character, formatting it within the word limit, and you're good to go. Now, if you're interested in getting more information on the story writing process, by September, just next month, I would have the full online do it yourself course where you get all the information. So, all the things that I just spoke about, especially some advice based on some of the things I've seen students do for the exam that I would either recommend or not recommend, you can get all that in a fully online video course complete with material that's going to come out by September. Please stay subscribed to CSBS Learning, and you will get more information about that as well as links to the sign up page for that. Okay. Your other option, if it is you want even more time and attention and feedback, because hey, feedback is king. Let me tell you that feedback is king. You can always sign up for my classes in September. I would be doing short story in the month of September. Our classes are going to be on a Sunday, and you'll see more information in terms of signing up for that here at CSBS Learning. So, of course, stay subscribed. All right. Now, if I had one more thing to just recommend for short story writing is don't limit your imagination in terms of the genre. Now, sometimes for at least I would say for CX, for CSEC, and again, it's dependent on the school and the teacher. Some teachers may talk about it, but you are permitted to write in a specific in any genre you want. You could write a horror, you could write a sci-fi fantasy. I've had students write romances already. Yes, they've written romances. Okay. What you want to do is really not limit your imagination, but understand that at the same time, and this is going to be slightly contradictory, that you're working with limited words. All right. So I'm kind of going back to saying, hey, practicing is super, super, super important. Um, additionally, guys, you want to really understand what you're working with in terms of the questions. Because as I said, it's either a picture prompt or a written prompt. Sometimes if you go with a written prompt, you're kind of locked in. And when I say locked in, you're locked in maybe into a character. So you might get a question that's like, Sandra looked down at the mess on the floor and knew she had no choice but to deal with it herself. Your main character is Sandra. Your main character is Sandra. In many cases, your main character is Sandra. It's just going to be the easiest thing to do in the exam, considering the time limit and the word limit. Your main character is going to be Sandra, and I mention that because I've had some learners, especially males, who refuse to write from any other point of view than a male point of view. That's okay. That's not a bad thing. But if you do that, let me tell you something. If you get a prompt like the one I just said, Sandra looked down at the mess and realized she had to deal with it herself, you're more than likely going to be you're going to have to write from a female character's perspective. That's going to lead me to say that if you're male, yes, you can write a female character's perspective in third person. That's not impossible. If you're female, you can write a male character's perspective in third person. That's not impossible. You also have the option in the exam of writing in first person or third person. Uh, the only reminder I would have about writing in first person is that sometimes, especially if you're not used to writing or reading not fantasy, but reading fiction, and you write in first person, sometimes persons who do that or who fall in that category, it's very hard for them to not think they're writing about themselves. So I had a student, a learner, who was writing about his mom being sad because he's writing about the character's mom being sad because the character's grandfather passed away. And he couldn't write it because he began to think of his own mom and his own grandfather, and the fact that his mom and his grandfather were very, very close. So he could not really, it was so hard. He got stumped, actually. He could not proceed because he kept thinking, I don't want to kill off my grandfather. And it's because he was writing in first person. So if it is you think you might fall in that trap, again, we're working with time limits and word limits. You want to probably avoid first person, and that's my only issue with the first person. If you write in first person, it's not wrong, but you don't want to write and then limit the story because you're thinking, oh my god, am I calling bad on somebody, am I calling bad on myself, right? That's not what it is. You're just writing your story, okay? And again, ultimately, I would say this is a practice issue. All right. Short stories are also one of the forms of writing that you do need to get feedback on. I would say that for all. However, for short story, definitely ideal, because you want someone to be able to let you know whether your plot development, your plot structure is on point. You want to let someone to let you know whether your characterization is solid and on point. You want someone to let you know whether your grammatical errors are minimal or not. Okay, grammatical errors are an issue. You want someone to let you know, hey, is my paragraphing okay? All right, did I work with good paragraphs? Like, is my resolution in my final paragraph and not in my second paragraph? Because trust me, if your resolution is in the second paragraph, that sucks. I don't want to know the end of the story before I get to the end. Then I can't read your story. There's no read for me. There's no need for me to read your story, right? So these are the kind of things that I would do for my learners when we're starting our class next month. And as I said, if it is you just want to do short story, we're just doing short story in September. Yes, I will give you all the tips, all the tactics for short story just in September in 4 classes. So you have the option of staying just for short story, or you have the option of staying for all of them, or you can just pick the one you want. So short story is in September. Then I'm doing argumentative. And argumentative is in October. I absolutely love argumentative. I do think argumentative is the easiest question to do in the paper. I'll let you know whenever I talk about argumentative. But trust me, it is the easiest question to do in the paper. But most persons are not well trained on it. So that's the drawback. And in November, I'm going to do all the informative question formats, which would be email, report, letter, notice, and the article, because the article came for January this year. Okay, so these are the basics for short story. I don't think I see any questions in the chat right now. All right, but if you think you have any other questions, you can always leave a comment on this video in terms of more information for either the do it yourself online course for short story, which is the ACE course, or if you want more information about joining the classes in September, whether if it's just for short story or for all of them, you can always get more. Stay subscribed. Stay subscribed to CSBS Learning, and you will get more information about those. And even for the courses in September, you do still have the option of either being a max or a top learner. With max learners, just doing a monthly assessment, right? Just for the monthly assessment, you'll just do assessment at the end, and you get very detailed feedback or love notes, as I call them. All my feedback for my students, my learners, are love notes. Or you can be a top learner and you can do the weekly assessment so that you kind of not double up, you quadruple actually the amount of information you can get in terms of how you can improve your work. So that means it's going to be less stressful for you for exams when it rolls around in May, June. All right. And it's more or less almost exam season because results already came out for the May June 2025 exams. Timetable, I haven't checked to see if the timetable is already out, but the timetable for Jan as well as June 2026 will be out soon. That has been the trend from CXE in the last couple of years. And you guys have less than a year. All right. So normally when I do these videos and these lives, I always, as we say, chuck in a little bit extra information. So let me chuck in that information right now. You cannot view, especially if you're writing exams in 2026, let's go with May, June. Those who are writing in January know they don't have a year. But if you are writing in May, June, I want you to understand that you do not have a year. You have ideally 6 months, and 6 months is being pleasant. That's the time you have for the exam. You really need to ensure that you're okay by the end of the year. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm actually probably going to cover this in our live, right? Upcoming live, but I'll still say this now. You want to ensure you're not stressed out when it comes to January 2026. In many cases, I've seen where students, when it comes to that term 2 in Form 5 or term 2 of the exam year, they're swamped with SBAs, swamped with SBAs that are still not done, swamped with trying to, really scrambling to learn information that they missed out. I would strongly recommend that you make the sacrifice this term. In fact, it's August. If you've had a lot of fun and done nothing, you can start it now. But if you want to wait till September, that's a okay. Resting is crucial. Resting and recharging is crucial. But you want to make sure that when you start Form 5 officially, that you really hit the ground running. Get all of your syllabi. Get the syllabi from CXC. I follow whatever CXC says in the syllabi. Anything that anyone says, it's just hearsay. What CXC says is accurate. And CXC syllabi tend to be, for the most part, they tend to be very, very, very detailed. To a certain degree, too detailed, but they tend to be accurate. I recommend you get the syllabi, start to look and see what the exam paper is supposed to look like. Collect exam papers. That's going to be my second piece of information, my second advice. Collect exam papers. Don't not have exam papers. Don't wait till January. Start collecting them. And if it is, well, I'll give this advice for English. For English, you can even look at the older papers and do them for practice. I've had some persons say, oh no, I can't look at anything before 2018 because the syllabus changed. You can still do that. All right. I would just say that maybe the summary is a bit more challenging before those days. And well, the pictures were horrid for short story anyway. So no problem there. But collect them. And the third thing I'd recommend is try to set some rewards for yourself because resting is important. You do not want to be all work and no play. All right. It's too tiring. You will get burnt out. So create a timetable, ensure that you know whatever days you have lessons, whatever days you have your classes, your school timetable, um, what days you have actual study. And study should not just be reading a book, study should be doing some questions at this point in time. And make sure you give yourself a reward if you hit all your goals. All right, definitely make sure you do that. Okay, so if you have any questions, again, please do leave a comment, and I will definitely tell you that I'll leave you with the words that I think are really important for you to remember, for every single learner to remember. And that's: I am succeeding, I am successful, I know myself, I love myself. Guys, you have a great day. Thanks so much for being here. Bye.